Subscribe to Storylab for more stories. Now, let's begin this one. Chapter 1. Homecoming Shadows. Staff Sergeant Clark Ortega adjusted his duffel bag as he walked up the cracked driveway of his suburban home. 15 months in Afghanistan had changed him, weathered his face, sharpened his instincts, and taught him that evil often wore familiar faces. The September evening air felt strange after the desert heat, but something else felt wrong. The house was too quiet. Clark had built this life carefully before his deployment. Diana, his wife of 10 years, worked as a nurse at the local hospital. Their daughter Sophia, now 8, had been the light of his world, a precocious girl who loved dinosaurs and soccer. He'd video called them weekly, but the calls had become shorter lately, Diana's explanations increasingly vague. The front door opened before he could knock. Diana appeared, her auburn hair disheveled, dark circles under green eyes that once sparkled. She looked thinner, nervous. "Clark." Her voice carried no warmth. "You're early." Caught an earlier transport. He searched her face. "Where's Sophia?" "Upstairs. She's different now." The deployment was hard on her. Something cold settled in Clark's stomach. In his 28 years, including 3 tours overseas, he learned to trust his instincts. They were screaming now. "I'll go see her." "Clark, wait." But he was already climbing the stairs, muscle memory guiding him to his daughter's room. He knocked softly. "Sophia?" "It's Daddy." Silence. Then, barely audible, "Daddy?" He opened the door. Sophia sat hunched on her bed, wearing an oversized t-shirt that wasn't hers. But what made Clark's blood freeze was the black leather collar around her small neck, complete with metal studs and a dangling tag. "Sophia." His voice came out strangled. She looked up with eyes that had seen too much. "Daddy, you came back." Clark knelt beside the bed, his hands shaking as he examined the collar. The tag read, "Property of Rod." His vision tunneled. "Who did this to you, sweetheart?" Sophia's lower lip trembled. "Mom's boyfriend, Rod. He said this is what your blood belongs to now." He made me bark for my food, Daddy." "Well, I didn't bark loud enough. I didn't eat." The room spun. Clark's military training kicked in, assess, adapt, overcome. But this wasn't a battlefield. This was his daughter, violated and terrorized in his own home. With steady hands, despite his rage, he unclasped the collar and threw it across the room. Sophia collapsed into his arms, sobbing. "It's okay, baby. Daddy's here now." Did he hurt you in other ways?" "He hit me when I cried for you. Said soldiers' kids need to be tough." "And She whispered something that made Clark see red. Footsteps on the stairs. Diana appeared in the doorway with a man Clark had never seen. Tall, lean, with cruel eyes and a smug smile. Mid-30s, expensive clothes that didn't hide his predatory nature. "So you're the hero husband," Rod Gay said, his voice dripping sarcasm. "Diana's told me all about you. Frankly, I've been a better father to your kid than you ever were." Clark stood slowly, his 6-foot frame filling the doorway. Years of combat had taught him to read men, and Rod Gay was a coward who preyed on the vulnerable. "Get out of my house." Rod laughed. "Your house? I've been paying the mortgage while you were playing soldier. Diana and I have an understanding now." "Clark, please." Diana stepped forward. "Let me explain. Take Sophia to your mother's," Clark said quietly, never taking his eyes off Rod. "Now." Something in Clark's tone made Diana move. She gathered Sophia's things while Rod continued talking, oblivious to the danger he was in. "You military types are all the same. Gone for months, expecting everything to stay frozen. Life moves on, buddy. Your wife needed a real man." Clark waited until he heard Diana's car pull out of the driveway. Then he turned back to Rod, who was now alone with a man who'd killed Taliban fighters with his bare hands. "You made my daughter bark for food." Rod's smirk faltered slightly. "Kids need discipline. Something you'd know if you were around." Clark took 1 step forward. Rod took 2 steps back. "You have 10 seconds to get out. After that, I stop being civilized." Rod tried to puff out his chest, but fear crept into his eyes. "Diana will choose me. Your marriage is over, soldier boy." Clark pulled out his phone and made 1 call. "Dave? It's Clark. I'm back. Meet me at the usual place in an hour." He hung up and smiled at Rod, a cold smile that had preceded the deaths of insurgents. 10 seconds are up. Rod scrambled toward the stairs. This isn't over. But Clark was already planning. Rod Gay had made the fatal mistake of hurting his daughter. In Afghanistan, Clark had learned that some battles required patience, strategy, and absolute commitment. The war was just beginning. Chapter 2. Gathering Intelligence. The Brass Monkey Bar sat on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where veterans gathered to drink away memories and cops looked the other way. Clark nursed a beer while waiting for Dave Blackwell, his former squad mate who'd returned from deployment 6 months earlier. Dave arrived 15 minutes later, built like a linebacker, with intelligent eyes and the same controlled fury that marked all of Clark's unit. They'd saved each other's lives in Kandahar, bonds forged in blood and trust. "You look like you want to kill someone," Dave said, sliding into the booth. "I do." Clark explained everything. Sophia's collar, the abuse, Rod's arrogance. Dave's expression darkened with each detail. "What do you need?" "Information. Rod Gay. I need to know everything about him. Weaknesses, habits, where he works, who he owes money to." Dave nodded. "I'll make some calls. My cousin's a PI now." "What about Diana?" Clark's jaw tightened. "She enabled this. Let a predator abuse our daughter while I was serving our country. You sure she wasn't being manipulated too? These guys are slick." "Maybe. But Sophia suffered while Diana did nothing. That changes things." Dave leaned forward. "Clark, whatever you're planning, I'm planning to protect my daughter. Whatever that takes." They drank in silence until Dave's phone buzzed. He answered, listened, then hung up. That was fast. Rod Gay, 34, works construction management for Morrison Brothers. Has a record, domestic violence, 2 DUIs, suspected drug dealing, but never charged. Lives in a trailer park on Creek Road. Drives a black F-150. Clark memorized every detail. Enemies. Owes money to some rough people. Word is he's been skimming from job sites to pay gambling debts. Morrison Brothers is family-owned. They don't tolerate thieves. A plan began forming in Clark's mind. In Afghanistan, they'd called it pressure point warfare, finding an enemy's weaknesses and applying precise pressure until they collapsed. "I need more intel. Can your cousin dig deeper?" "Consider it done." "But Clark," Dave grabbed his arm. "Whatever happened to Sophia, she needs her father more than she needs her father's revenge. She'll have both." Clark drove to his mother's house where Sophia was staying. Maxine Ortega, 62 and tough as nails, had raised Clark after his father died in Desert Storm. She took one look at her son's face and knew someone was going to pay. "Sophia's asleep," she said, leading him to the kitchen. Poor baby cried for 2 hours before exhaustion took her. "I've seen abuse cases in my nursing career, but this..." She shook her head. "How bad?" "Physically, she'll heal. Emotionally, she's terrified." Clark flinches at loud noises, won't eat without permission. That monster broke her spirit. Clark's hands clenched. He won't hurt her again. "What are you planning?" "Justice." Maxine studied her son's face. She'd seen that expression once before, when playground bullies had tormented Clark in 3rd grade. The bullies had learned to avoid him after a very educational encounter behind the gymnasium. "Just be smart about it. Sophia needs you free, not in prison." Clark kissed his mother's forehead and went to check on his daughter. Sophia lay curled in a tight ball, even in sleep protecting herself. A dinosaur night light cast gentle shadows, the same light he'd bought her before deployment. He knelt beside the bed and whispered, "I promise you, sweetheart, no one will ever hurt you again." The next morning, Clark returned home to find Diana in the kitchen, looking haggard. Rod was nowhere to be seen. "We need to talk," Diana said. "Yes, we do." Clark poured coffee, his movements deliberate. "How long?" 6 months. "Clark, I was lonely, and he was charming at first. By the time I saw his true nature, he'd moved in, and I was scared." "Scared of what? Calling the police? Calling me? Protecting our daughter?" Diana's face crumpled. "He said if I try to leave him or contact you, he'd hurt Sophia worse. He showed me pictures of what he'd done to other kids." Clark set down his mug carefully. "What pictures?" "On his phone. Other children. Clark. He's done this before." The revelation hit like a freight train. Rod Gay wasn't just an abuser. He was a predator with a history. This changed everything. Clark wasn't just protecting Sophia. He was stopping a monster. Where's his phone now? He keeps it with him always. Clark, please don't do anything rash. He's dangerous. Clark looked at his wife, really looked at her. Fear had aged her, carved lines around her eyes. She was a victim too, but that didn't excuse enabling Sophia's torture. Pack your things, Diana. You and Sophia are staying at Mom's until this is resolved. What are you going to do? Clark smiled, but held no warmth. I'm going to have a conversation with Rod about his career choices. His phone buzzed. Dave got more intel. Rod's in deep with Tony Reeves, a loan shark. Owes $50,000. Also found something interesting about Morrison Brothers. Call me. Clark stepped outside and dialed. Mark Morrison, the company owner, is ex-Marine, Dave explained. Lost his own daughter in a drunk driving accident. If he knew what kind of man Rod really is. Perfect. Clark's mind raced through possibilities. What about the cops? Anyone we can trust? Detective Alan Reed. Good guy, has kids of his own. But you'll need solid evidence for anything to stick. I'll get evidence. One way or another. Clark hung up and walked back inside. Diana was packing, tears streaming down her face. I'm sorry, she whispered. I'm so sorry I let this happen. Sorry doesn't heal our daughter. Clark's voice was ice. But maybe we can prevent this from happening to other children. Diana looked up sharply. What do you mean? I mean Rod Gay's career as a predator is about to come to a very permanent end. Chapter 3. The First Move. Clark spent the next 2 days conducting surveillance, using skills honed in military intelligence. Rod's patterns emerged quickly. Work from 7 to 4, drinks at Murphy's bar until 8, then home to his trailer. Weekends were spent at illegal gambling dens or with other unsavory contacts. On Wednesday evening, Clark positioned himself in the shadows outside Murphy's bar. At 7:47 p.m., Rod stumbled out, clearly intoxicated. Perfect. Clark followed at a distance as Rod drove his F-150 toward Creek Road, weaving slightly. The trailer park was isolated, perfect for an undisturbed conversation. Rod parked and stumbled toward his trailer. Clark waited 5 minutes, then approached. The front door was unlocked. Rod's arrogance would be his downfall. Clark slipped inside, moving silently through the cramped space. The trailer reeked of beer, cigarettes, and something else. Fierce sweat. Rod was in the bedroom, passed out fully clothed on an unmade bed. Clark surveyed the room methodically. On the nightstand, Rod's phone, a .38 revolver, and a small bag of white powder. More interesting was the lockbox under the bed. Clark picked the simple lock in 30 seconds, a skill acquired during recon missions. Inside the box, his blood ran cold. Photos, videos, multiple children, all young, all terrified. Sophia wasn't Rod's first victim. She was his latest in a long line of broken innocence. Clark photographed everything with his own phone, careful not to disturb the originals. This evidence would bury Rod, but not quickly enough. The legal system moved slowly, and predators like Rod often found ways to escape justice. Rod stirred on the bed. Clark melted back into the shadows, watching. Rod sat up groggily, then noticed his lockbox was slightly askew. Alarm sobered him instantly. What the hell? Rod scrambled to check the box's contents. Clark stepped into the light. Looking for something? Rod spun around, his hand reaching for the nightstand gun. Clark was faster, grabbing Rod's wrist and applying pressure to a nerve cluster. Rod screamed and dropped to his knees. Scream all you want, Clark said conversationally. Nearest neighbor is half a mile away. You broke into my house. I'll have you arrested. Clark released the pressure point and backhanded Rod across the face. Not hard enough to cause serious damage, just enough to get his attention. Let's discuss your photography hobby. Rod's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. Clark held up his phone, showing the photos he'd taken. 17 children, Rod. 17. Sophia was just the latest. You can't prove anything. Actually, I can. But here's the thing. I don't want to wait for the justice system. You understand? Men like you often escape on technicalities. Clark picked up Rod's gun, checking the cylinder. Loaded. In Afghanistan, we had a simple policy for people who hurt children. Want to guess what it was? Rod scrambled backward. You're crazy. You can't just. Can't what? Kill a child predator? Rod, I've killed 17 men in combat. All of them better human beings than you. Please, I'll disappear. You'll never see me again. Clark smiled. Oh, you're going to disappear. But not the way you think. He pulled out his phone and dialed. Dave? Phase 1 complete. Time for Phase 2. What are you doing? Rod whimpered. Calling in favors. See, I have friends in various places. Ex-military, law enforcement, people who share my views on child predators. Clark's phone buzzed with a text from Dave. Alan Reed is on standby. Mark Morrison wants to meet tomorrow. Tony Reeves very interested in Rod's location. Here's what's going to happen, Clark said, settling into a chair. Tomorrow morning, you're going to make some phone calls. First, you'll confess to your boss about stealing from Morrison Brothers. Second, you'll tell Tony Reeves where he can find you to collect his money. Third, you'll call Detective Reed and confess to child abuse. You're insane. I won't do any of that. Clark stood and walked to the kitchen, returning with a large knife. Rod's eyes widened in terror. Option 2 is I kill you right now. Option 3 is I turn you over to some associates who specialize in making people disappear permanently. Your choice. Rod's resolve crumbled. What happens if I make the calls? Then you face justice through proper channels. Prison, where child abusers receive appropriate treatment from fellow inmates. That's a death sentence. Yes, it is, but it's a legal death sentence. The other options are more immediate. Clark's phone rang. Dave's voice. Clark, we've got a problem. Just got word Rod's supposed to pick up another kid tomorrow. A 7-year-old boy from the daycare center. Clark's vision went red. Another Sophia. Another child about to be destroyed. Change of plans, Clark said, hanging up. He looked at Rod with new purpose. You're going to make those calls tonight. And tomorrow, you're coming with me to make sure that little boy stays safe. I can't. Clark grabbed Rod by the throat, lifting him off the ground. You can and you will. Because if one more child suffers because of you, I won't wait for prison justice. I'll handle this personally. Rod nodded frantically. Clark released him and handed him the phone. Start with Morrison. Tell him you've been stealing. Now. Rod's hands shook as he dialed. Clark listened to the one-sided conversation, Mark Morrison's angry voice audible through the speaker. When Rod hung up, he was pale and sweating. Tony Reeves next. This conversation was shorter. Tony Reeves was not a man who wasted words. Rod would meet him Friday night at the old warehouse on Industrial Boulevard. Bring the money or bring a prayer. Now, Detective Reed, I can't confess to. Clark picked up the knife again. You can and you will. Unless you prefer option 2. Rod made the call. Detective Reed would be at the trailer in 1 hour to take his statement and collect evidence. Perfect. Clark stood. You're going to tell him everything, Rod. Every child, every photo, every sick thing you've done. And you're going to give him that lockbox. They'll kill me in prison. Yes, they will. Eventually. But until then, you'll suffer every day knowing that other predators see you as fresh meat. Justice, Rod. Sometimes it's not pretty, but it's always earned. Clark moved toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Rod, if you try to run, or if you hurt that boy tomorrow, or if you warn anyone about our conversation, well, let's just say my friends and are very good at tracking people down. As Clark walked to his truck, he heard Rod sobbing in the trailer. Phase 1 complete. By tomorrow night, Rod Gay would be in custody, facing charges that would end his freedom forever. But Clark wasn't done yet. Justice required more than just arrest and conviction. It required ensuring Rod Gay never had the opportunity to hurt another child ever again. And Clark intended to guarantee that personally. Chapter 4. Tightening the Noose. Detective Alan Reed stood in Rod Gay's trailer Thursday morning, methodically cataloging evidence that would put the predator away for life. Clark watched from his truck across the street as crime scene techs carried out boxes of photographs, computer equipment, and other damning materials. Sick bastard, Reed had said when Clark met him at the station earlier. This evidence is ironclad. We'll have him processed and in county lockup by tonight. But Clark knew the justice system's limitations. Good behavior, plea bargains, overcrowded prisons. Rod might serve 15 years instead of life. 15 years, then freedom to hunt new victims. Unacceptable. Clark's phone buzzed. Dave, Morrison wants to meet. Noon at the construction site. He's bringing friends. At 11:45 a.m., Clark pulled into the Morrison Brothers construction yard. Mark Morrison stood waiting, 55, graying hair, eyes that had seen too much loss. Behind him stood two other men, tall, broad-shouldered, with the bearing of ex-military. "You're Ortega?" Morrison's handshake was firm, his gaze direct. "Yes, sir. Dave told me about your daughter." "I'm sorry." "Thank you. Dave said you lost someone too." Morrison's face hardened. "My Katie, 7 years old. Drunk driver took her while she was riding her bike. I understand what it means to want justice. Rod Gay has been stealing from your company, so he confessed last night. Question is, why should I care about theft when you've told me he's a child predator?" Clark studied Morrison's face. This was a man who understood that some problems required solutions outside the law. "Because I need Rod Gay to be in a very specific place Friday night. And I need him scared, desperate, and alone." Morrison smiled grimly. "Tony Reeves doesn't usually accept excuses for late payments." "No, he doesn't. And Rod owes him $50,000 he doesn't have. Interesting situation. Rod steals from me, gets fired with cause, loses his income stream right when Tony expects payment." Morrison's companions exchanged meaningful looks. Timing's a hell of a thing. "It is, especially when word gets around about Rod's hobbies. Men like Tony Reeves have daughters too." Morrison nodded slowly. "What do you need from me?" "Just make sure Rod knows he's fired and why. Let him understand there's no coming back from this. Men make stupid decisions when they're desperate. Consider it done." Morrison paused. "What about the legal case?" "Detective Reed has enough evidence to convict 10 Rod Gays. But trials take time, and predators sometimes walk on technicalities. Sometimes they do. Sometimes they don't make it a trial." Clark met Morrison's gaze. Sometimes justice finds other ways. At 2 p.m., Clark parked outside the elementary school where the 7-year-old boy Rod had targeted attended classes. He'd learned the boy's name, Jeremy Ayers, and his mother's work schedule. Single parent, worked late shifts at the hospital. Perfect victim for a predator. Clark called the school's main office. "Hi, this is Detective Reeves with the police department," he said, deepening his voice slightly. "We need to speak with Mrs. Ayers immediately regarding her son Jeremy. It's urgent." 20 minutes later, Christina Ayers arrived at the school, pale and shaking. Clark intercepted her in the parking lot, showing his military ID. "Mrs. Ayers? I'm Clark Ortega. There's a situation involving your son's safety. Can we talk privately?" She followed him to his truck, fear evident in every movement. "Jeremy's in danger," Clark said without preamble. "There's a man named Rod Gay who's been targeting children. My daughter was one of his victims." Christina's hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God, is Jeremy? Jeremy's safe right now. But this man was planning to approach him today after school. I stopped that from happening." "How? Who are you?" Clark explained everything. Sophia's abuse, Rod's arrest, the evidence. Christina listened with growing horror and rage. "What can I do?" "Take Jeremy somewhere safe for the weekend. Visit relatives, go out of town. Just until Rod Gay is permanently neutralized." "Neutralized?" Clark's expression was stone. "He won't be a threat to anyone after Friday night." Christina studied his face, understanding flooding her features. "You're going to kill him. I'm going to ensure he never hurts another child. The method is flexible." "Good." Her response surprised Clark. "If someone hurt Jeremy the way they hurt your daughter, I'd want them dead too." At 6 p.m., Clark met Dave at their usual bar. Dave looked troubled. Alan Reed called. "Rod Gay made bail 2 hours ago." Clark set down his beer carefully. "Who posted it?" "Anonymous cashier's check. $50,000. Someone doesn't want Rod talking to prosecutors. That's what Reed thinks. Could be Rod has connections we don't know about." Clark's mind raced. Rod out on bail changed everything. Instead of sitting safely in jail until his meeting with Tony Reeves, Rod was free to run or to hurt more children. Where is he now? Unknown. Didn't return to his trailer. Reed has units looking, but Rod knows this area. Clark's phone rang. Unknown number. Clark. Diana's voice. Panicked. Rod's here at your mother's house. He has a gun, and he's demanding to see Sophia. He says if we don't let him in, he'll burn the house down. On my way. Keep him talking. Clark was already moving, Dave beside him. Call Reed, Clark ordered. Tell him officer needs assistance at 1247 Maple Street. Armed suspect, hostages. As they raced through town, Clark's military training kicked in. Assess the situation, neutralize the threat, protect the innocent. Rod Gay had made his final mistake by threatening Sophia again. What's the plan? Dave asked. Simple. Rod Gay dies tonight. They pulled up to Maxine's house to find Rod's F-150 parked sideways across the front lawn. Lights were on inside, shadows moving behind curtains. Clark could hear Rod shouting. Back door, Clark told Dave. Give me 3 minutes, then create a distraction. Clark circled the house, using shadows and landscaping for cover. The back door was locked, but he'd climbed through Sophia's bedroom window 1,000 times during childhood games of hide-and-seek. The window slid open silently. Clark dropped into the room where Sophia was hiding under her bed, eyes wide with terror. Daddy, it's okay, sweetheart. Daddy's here. He could hear Rod in the living room, ranting at Diana and Maxine. Where is she? Where's the little bitch? She belongs to me now. Clark kissed Sophia's forehead. Stay here. Don't come out until I tell you. He moved through the hallway, staying low. In the living room, Rod stood with his back to the hallway, pointing his .38 at Diana while Maxine sat rigidly on the couch. You think your soldier, boy husband scares me? Rod was saying, I've got nothing left to lose now. If I can't have Sophia, nobody can. Rod. Clark's voice cut through the room like a blade. Rod spun around, his gun swinging toward Clark. But Clark was already moving, 15 years of combat training compressed into 3 seconds of lethal efficiency. Rod's finger was pulling the trigger when Clark's hand chopped down on his wrist. The gun fired into the ceiling as Clark's other hand drove into Rod's throat, crushing his windpipe. Rod dropped, gasping and clawing at his neck. Clark picked up the fallen gun and looked down at the man who'd tortured his daughter. You made one mistake, Rod, Clark said quietly. You came after my family again. Through the window, Clark could see police cars arriving, their lights painting the room in red and blue. Clark, Diana whispered. The police. We'll find that Rod Gay broke into this house with a gun, threatening to kill a family. Clark looked at the dying man on the floor. Unfortunately, he resisted arrest. Clark knelt beside Rod, whose eyes were bulging as he struggled for air. The other children you hurt, Clark whispered. They can sleep safely now. Rod Gay's eyes went vacant. Clark stood and walked to the front door as Detective Reed burst through with 2 uniformed officers. Suspect is down, Clark reported calmly. He forced entry with a firearm and threatened to kill my family. I defended them. Reed looked at the scene, taking in Rod's position, the gun on the floor, the bullet hole in the ceiling. Anyone hurt? Just Rod Gay. Permanently. Reed nodded. EMTs are on the way, but I don't think they'll be needed. He looked at Clark with understanding. Self-defense. Clear case. Clark walked to Sophia's room and found her still hiding under the bed. Is the bad man gone, Daddy? Yes, sweetheart. The bad man is gone forever. Sophia crawled out and wrapped her arms around his neck. You promised no one would hurt me again, and no one will. Daddy keeps his promises. Outside, EMTs were loading Rod Gay's body into an ambulance. There would be paperwork, investigations, legal proceedings. But Clark felt only satisfaction. Rod Gay would never hurt another child. Justice had been served, but the story wasn't over yet. Chapter 5, Loose Ends. Friday morning brought unexpected visitors. Clark answered his front door to find 2 men in expensive suits, federal agents, judging by their bearing and the black SUV in his driveway. Mr. Ortega? Agent Hugh Humphrey, FBI. This is Agent Santiago Gillespie. We'd like to discuss Rod Gay's recent activities. Clark invited them in, his mind already calculating possibilities. Federal involvement meant Rod's predation had crossed state lines or involved larger networks. We understand Mr. Gay is deceased, Agent Humphrey said, settling into Clark's living room. Killed while threatening your family. That's correct. Detective Reed has the full report. We're not here about his death, Mr. Ortega. We're interested in his life. Specifically, his connections to a larger operation. Agent Gillespie opened a tablet, showing surveillance photos. Rod Gay meeting with various men in parking lots, hotel rooms, secluded locations. Mr. Gay was part of a network trafficking in child exploitation materials. We've been tracking this organization for 18 months. Clark felt cold rage building. How many children? Hundreds, possibly thousands across multiple states. Mr. Gay was a mid-level operator. He recruited victims and produced content. You knew this and didn't arrest him? We were building a case against the entire network. Sometimes you have to let small fish swim to catch the big ones. Clark stood abruptly. That small fish tortured my daughter while you were building your case. We understand your anger. No, you don't. Clark's voice was ice. You let a predator operate freely to protect your investigation. How many children suffered while you gathered evidence? Agent Humphrey and Gillespie exchanged glances. Mr. Ortega, we need your help. Rod Gay's phone contained communications with his handlers. We believe they're planning to eliminate loose ends. People who knew about Rod's activities. Meaning, your family could be targets. These people don't leave witnesses. Clark sat back down, his tactical mind engaging. What kind of help? Agent Gillespie leaned forward. We want you to attend Rod Gay's funeral. Let yourself be seen. Draw out his associates. As bait. As an experienced soldier helping protect other children. We'll have surveillance teams, backup. No. Clark's refusal was flat. I won't risk my family for your operation. Mr. Ortega, this network is still active. Right now, tonight, children are being abused while these predators think they're safe. The words hit Clark like physical blows. More Sophia's. More innocents suffering while bureaucrats played games. What exactly are you proposing? Agent Humphrey spread photos on the coffee table. 3 men, Jake Sosa, Clayton Gray, and Byron Collier. They handled Rod Gay's business arrangements. We believe they'll attend his funeral to ensure he's really dead and assess potential threats. Clark studied the faces. Sosa looked like muscle, thick neck, scarred knuckles, prison tattoos. Gray appeared more refined. Expensive clothes, manicured nails, the look of a man who never got his hands dirty. Collier was somewhere between, intelligent eyes, but with the predatory alertness of a career criminal. Where's the funeral? Tomorrow, 2 p.m., Riverside Cemetery. Rod's mother is paying for a simple service. His mother knows what he was? We don't think so. Rod Gay kept his activities compartmentalized. Clark made his decision. I'll go, but we do this my way. Mr. Ortega, my way, or find another soldier to be your bait. Agent Humphrey nodded reluctantly. What do you need? First, my family disappears until this is over. Somewhere these people can't find them. Second, I want full tactical support, not just surveillance. Third, when we identify these predators, they don't walk away on legal technicalities. The FBI doesn't assassinate American citizens. The FBI doesn't. But sometimes citizens defend themselves when criminals threaten their families. The agents left without committing to Clark's terms, but he knew they'd be back. They needed him more than he needed them. That afternoon, Clark met with Dave Blackwell and 2 other veterans from their unit, Cody Bird and Jeremy Ayers, men who'd stood with him in firefights and understood the meaning of absolute commitment. This is bigger than Rod Gay, Clark explained, showing them the photos. These bastards are running a network. Kids all over the country. Cody cracked his knuckles. What's the mission? Attend a funeral. Identify targets. Eliminate threats to our families and other children. Rules of engagement? Jeremy asked. There are no rules. These people prey on children. We end them. Dave studied the surveillance photos. Federal operation? FBI wants to arrest them and build court cases. I want them dead. Works for me, Cody said. When do we start? That evening, Clark moved Sophia and Diana to a safe house Dave had arranged. A cabin owned by a veteran friend, off the grid and defensible. Maxine refused to leave. I've lived in this house for 30 years, she said firmly. No child-molesting criminals are going to scare me away. Mom, it's not safe. Clark Anthony Ortega, I changed your diapers and taught you to shoot. I can handle whatever these men might try. Clark knew that tone. Arguing was futile. Instead, he stationed Cody at the house with orders to protect Maxine at all costs. What about you? Diana asked as Clark prepared to leave the safe house. I'm going to a funeral. Clark, what you did to Rod Gay was justified. But this sounds like you're planning something more. Clark kissed Sophia's forehead, then looked at his wife. I'm planning to make sure no other little girl has to wear a dog collar and bark for food. Diana's eyes filled with tears. Just come back to us. I will, when this is finished. As Clark drove back to town, his phone buzzed. Agent Humphrey, your family's protection is approved. Tactical support authorized. But Ortega, no unnecessary casualties. Clark deleted the message without responding. Humphrey's definition of necessary might differ from his own. Saturday morning, Clark dressed in his military dress uniform, the one he'd worn to receive his Bronze Star for valor in Afghanistan. If he was going to war, he'd do it properly. At 1:30 p.m., he arrived at Riverside Cemetery. The funeral was sparsely attended. Rod's elderly mother, a few construction workers who'd known him superficially, and 3 men who didn't belong. Jake Sosa stood near the back, eyes constantly scanning for threats. Clayton Gray lingered by an expensive sedan, checking his phone repeatedly. Byron Collier had positioned himself with clear sight lines to all entrances. Professional paranoia. These were dangerous men. Clark approached Rod's mother and offered condolences, playing the role of a concerned neighbor. The 3 predators watched every interaction, cataloging faces and behaviors. As the brief service concluded, Clark walked toward his truck, letting himself appear unaware of surveillance. In his peripheral vision, he saw Collier following at a distance. Perfect. Phase 2 was about to begin. Chapter 6, The Hunt Begins. Byron Collier followed Clark's truck through suburban streets, maintaining professional distance. Clark led him on a meandering route toward the industrial district, using store windows and mirrors to track his pursuer's black Escalade. At a red light, Clark's phone buzzed. Agent Humphrey, Target 1 following you. We have eyes on targets 2 and 3. They're regrouping at the Marriott downtown. Clark smiled grimly. The network was responding exactly as predicted, identifying threats and planning elimination. But they'd underestimated their opposition. Clark turned into the parking lot of an abandoned warehouse, the same location where Tony Reeves had planned to collect Rod Gay's debt. Fitting symmetry, he parked near the building's rear entrance and waited. Collier's Escalade appeared 2 minutes later, parking near the street with clear escape routes. Professional, but predictable, Clark walked toward the warehouse, appearing to make a phone call. In reality, he was activating a communications device Dave had provided military-grade equipment that would coordinate with his backup team. Phoenix to base, Clark said quietly. Target 1 in position. Beginning engagement. Dave's voice crackled through his earpiece. Copy, Phoenix. Overwatch in position. You're clear to proceed. Clark entered the warehouse through a side door he'd unlocked earlier. The building was perfect, multiple levels, good sight lines, and soundproof enough for private conversations. Footsteps echoed outside. Collier was approaching, probably armed and definitely cautious. Clark positioned himself behind a concrete pillar and waited. The main door opened slowly. Collier entered, gun drawn, moving with the careful precision of a man who'd done this before. He wasn't just a predator, he was an enforcer. I know you're in here, Collier called out. Let's make this simple. You saw something at the funeral you shouldn't have. We need to discuss your discretion. Clark remained silent, letting Collier advance deeper into the warehouse. You're military, right? I can tell by how you carry yourself. Afghanistan? Iraq? Doesn't matter. You understand operational security. Collier was getting closer. Clark could hear his breathing, the soft scrape of his shoes on concrete. Here's the thing about Rod Gay, Collier continued, his voice echoing in the empty space. He was sloppy, brought too much attention to our business. We were going to eliminate him anyway. You just saved us the trouble. Clark shifted position, moving silently behind another pillar. Collier was 15 feet away now, guns sweeping in practice arcs. But you've created a problem. Your little display of righteousness has the feds sniffing around. That's bad for business. What kind of business? Clark asked, his voice coming from shadows. Collier spun toward the sound, but Clark was already moving. The kind that pays very well for specialized content, Collier replied, trying to track Clark's position. Children are a premium market. Rage flared in Clark's chest, but he controlled it. Emotion made soldiers careless. How many children? Does it matter? Supply and demand, soldier boy. There's always demand. Clark appeared behind Collier, moving like a ghost. His hand chopped down on Collier's gun arm, while his other arm locked around the predator's throat. Collier was strong and trained, but Clark had 15 years of combat experience and righteous fury. The struggle lasted 30 seconds before Collier went limp. Clark dragged the unconscious man to a chair Dave had positioned earlier and secured him with zip ties. When Collier awakened, he found himself facing a very angry soldier with a very sharp knife. Let's discuss your business, Clark said conversationally, starting with names and locations. Collier's bravado evaporated when he saw Clark's eyes. You're crazy. You can't just. Can't what? Torture a child predator? Byron, I've interrogated Taliban commanders. You're going to tell me everything, and then you're going to die. The only variable is how much you suffer first. Clark placed the knife point against Collier's kneecap. Network structure. Start talking. For the next hour, Collier revealed the scope of the operation. The network spanned 12 states, with over 200 active participants. They had clients in multiple countries, sophisticated distribution systems, and enough money to buy protection from local law enforcement. Jake Sosa runs muscle operations. Collier gasped after Clark applied pressure to a nerve cluster. Clayton Gray handles financial arrangements. Above them is a man named Lyle Gross. He coordinates everything from Chicago. How many children currently in the system? 40, maybe 50 active victims. They rotate locations every few weeks. Clark felt sick. 50 children living in hell while authorities built cases and gathered evidence. Where are they now? 3 locations. Farmhouse outside Millerville, warehouse in Springfield, and a cabin compound near Lake Morrison. Clark memorized every detail, then stepped back. Last question, Byron. Why children? Collier looked confused. What do you mean? Why do you hurt children? What kind of monster wakes up and decides to destroy innocents? Collier's face twisted with something beyond evil. Complete absence of empathy. Because we can. Because they're helpless and we're not. Because it feels good to have that kind of power. Clark nodded slowly. Thank you for being honest. The knife moved quickly. Collier died without making another sound. Clark activated his radio. Phoenix to base. Target 1 neutralized. Information acquired. Need immediate extraction. Copy, Phoenix. Vehicles approaching your location. Clark walked outside to find Dave waiting with Jeremy and Cody. They loaded Collier's body into the Escalade while Clark briefed them on the intelligence. 50 kids, Jeremy whispered, his face pale. Jesus Christ. We're going to get them, Clark said firmly. All of them. Dave checked his watch. What about the feds? They're expecting updates. They'll get updates after we rescue the children. Clark's phone rang. Agent Humphrey. Ortega, we lost contact with Target 1. What's your status? Byron Collier won't be a problem anymore, Clark replied. But we have bigger issues. I've got locations for 3 facilities holding approximately 50 children. Silence on the line. Then, how did you acquire this intelligence? Collier was very cooperative before he died. Died? Ortega, you were supposed to identify threats, not what? Not eliminate child predators? Agent Humphrey, every minute we waste talking is another minute those children suffer. We need to coordinate with local law enforcement. No, we need to move fast before Sosa and Gray realize their partner is missing. Clark ended the call and looked at his team. 3 men who'd served their country with honor, now facing a different kind of war. Gentlemen, we have rescue operations to plan. Chapter 7, Children of War. The War Council convened at Dave's house at midnight. Clark spread maps across the kitchen table while Jeremy worked on his laptop, pulling satellite imagery and building schematics. 3 targets, Clark announced. Millerville Farmhouse, isolated, probably heavy security. Springfield Warehouse, urban setting, multiple escape routes. Lake Morrison Cabin Compound, remote, defendable terrain. Cody studied the maps with a sniper's eye. We'll need different approaches for each location. Agreed. Jeremy, what's our intel on guard rotations? Jeremy pulled up surveillance data he'd hacked from local traffic cameras. Millerville shows regular vehicle movements, every 4 hours like clockwork. Springfield has trucks coming and going randomly. Lake Morrison, he frowned. No traffic at all for the past week. Abandoned? Dave asked. Or they know we're coming. Clark replied grimly. His phone buzzed. Agent Humphrey again. Clark ignored it. Federal resources? Cody asked. Compromised. These networks have money and reach. Can't trust anyone we haven't bled with. Clark's phone rang insistently. This time, it was Detective Alan Reed. Clark, we need to talk. FBI says you killed Byron Collier. He resisted questioning. That's not going to fly with federal prosecutors. They want you in custody for interrogation. Clark looked at his team, men who'd followed him through Kandahar's worst neighborhoods, who trusted his judgment with their lives. Alan, how many children would die while federal prosecutors play games? Long pause. According to the intelligence you provided, all of them. Networks like this have cleanup protocols. Then you understand why I can't surrender right now. Clark, Reed's voice was heavy. I got 2 daughters. If someone hurt them like they hurt Sophia. What are you saying? I'm saying my radio's been malfunctioning tonight. Lots of static. Might not work properly for another 6 hours. Clark smiled grimly. Alan Reed was a good man. Understood. Maintain radio silence until 0600. Copy that. And Clark, bring those children home. At 0100 hours, the team synchronized watches and loaded equipment. Military-grade weapons, body armor, communications gear, and medical supplies. They'd rescued hostages in Afghanistan. This was the same mission on American soil. Rules of engagement? Jeremy asked. Anyone protecting child predators dies. Clark replied. Anyone helping rescue children lives. Simple math. They split into 2-man teams. Clark and Dave would hit the Millerville farmhouse. Jeremy and Cody would take the Springfield warehouse. Lake Morrison would wait until they'd secure the other locations and reinforcements. Radio check every 30 minutes, Clark ordered. If you don't hear from me by dawn, assume I'm compromised and proceed with federal contact. Dave loaded his rifle with practiced efficiency. Won't come to that. We're going home with those kids. The drive to Millerville took 40 minutes through back roads and farm country. Clark used the time to study building layouts and plan entry routes. The farmhouse sat on 20 acres, surrounded by open ground that would make approach difficult. 2 guards visible, Dave reported through binoculars. Rotating perimeter every 15 minutes. Professional spacing. Clark studied the property. Basement lights. That's where they'll keep the children. How do you want to play this? Clark checked his watch. 0247 hours. Wait for guard rotation, then fast approach. Suppress exterior security, breach the basement, secure hostages. What about interior guards? We go through them. At 0300, the guards completed their rotation and headed toward the farmhouse's rear entrance. Clark and Dave sprinted across 50 yards of open ground, using shadows and farm equipment for concealment. They reached the building as the guards entered. Clark counted to 10, then kicked in the front door. The entry hall was empty, but voices echoed from upstairs. Casual conversation, no alarm raised. Clark moved toward the basement stairs while Dave covered the upper level. The basement door was locked. Clark shot the lock and descended quickly, rifle ready. What he found made him understand why some men became monsters and others became soldiers. 8 children, ages 6 to 12, chained to walls in a concrete room that reeked of fear and worse. They looked at Clark with eyes that had seen hell. U.S. military, Clark said gently, removing his helmet so they could see his face. You're safe now. We're taking you home. A girl who couldn't have been older than Sophia spoke in a whisper. Are you real? Yes, sweetheart. What's your name? Sarah. Sarah Manning. Are you going to hurt us too? Clark knelt beside her, his heart breaking. No one will ever hurt you again. I promise. Footsteps on the stairs. Dave's voice. 3 down upstairs. One got to a radio before I could stop him. Means company's coming. How fast can we move these kids? Dave assessed the chains and locks. 5 minutes to free them. Another 10 to get them to the vehicles. Do it. Clark activated his radio. Eagle 1 to Eagle 2. Primary objective secured. 8 packages, all mobile. What's your status? Jeremy's voice crackled back. Warehouse was a trap. Empty building, armed response team waiting. We're taking fire. Casualties? Negative, but we're pinned down. This was a setup. Clark's mind raced. Someone had leaked their plans. The network knew they were coming. Eagle 2, extract immediately. Rendezvous at Checkpoint Alpha. Copy that. Eagle 2 out. Dave had freed 6 children when vehicle engines roared in the distance. Company's here. Clark looked at the children, traumatized, weak but alive. Getting them out safely was the only mission that mattered now. Loading the kids. We move in 60 seconds. They carried the children upstairs and out the back entrance as headlights swept the front driveway. 3 SUVs and a van. Enough firepower to level the farmhouse. Vehicles loaded, Dave reported. Where to? Police station. Alan Reed will protect them. As they drove away, Clark saw the farmhouse burning in his rearview mirror. The network was destroying evidence, cutting ties, eliminating witnesses. The war was escalating. His radio crackled. Phoenix, this is Agent Humphrey. We have your location. Stand down and surrender custody of the children. Clark looked at Sarah Manning in his back seat. 8 years old, wearing clothes that were too big and carrying psychological scars that might never heal. Negative, Agent Humphrey. These children need medical attention and psychological support, not federal processing. Ortega, you're interfering with a federal investigation. Clark switched off the radio. The FBI had let these children suffer while building their case. Now politicians and bureaucrats would parade them through interrogations and court proceedings, traumatizing them further. Unacceptable. At the police station, Detective Reed waited with medical personnel and social workers. The children were transferred to people who would actually help them heal. Federal agents are en route, Reed warned. You've got maybe 20 minutes. Clark nodded. Take care of them, Alan. Don't let the feds turn them into evidence. What about you? Clark looked at Sarah Manning one last time. She waved from behind a social worker's protective embrace, the first smile he'd seen from any of the children. I'm going to finish this. Jeremy and Cody arrived as federal vehicles surrounded the police station. The team regrouped quickly, slipping out through the station's rear exit while agents argued jurisdiction with local police. Warehouse was definitely a setup, Jeremy reported. Someone knew we were coming. Inside information, Clark agreed. Which means Lake Morrison is compromised too. So what's the play? Clark studied his map one last time. 50 children were still out there, and the network was cleaning house. Traditional tactics wouldn't work anymore. Time for unconventional warfare. We're going hunting, Clark announced. But first, we're going to visit an old friend. Jake Sosa was about to learn why you never threaten a soldier's family. Chapter 8, The Reckoning. Jake Sosa's construction company occupied a warehouse complex on the outskirts of town. Legitimate business providing cover for illegitimate activities. Clark and his team watched from across the street as Sosa's men loaded trucks with what appeared to be normal building supplies. 6 guards, rotating shifts, Dave reported through binoculars. All armed, all professional. Jeremy monitored communications equipment he'd liberated from federal surveillance. Encrypted radio traffic. They're definitely moving something tonight. The children, Clark said grimly. They're relocating before we can find them. Cody checked his rifle scope. How do you want to play this? Frontal assault or surgical strike? Clark studied the compound. Sosa was inside the main building, but the real prize was intelligence. Locations of the relocated children, network contacts, financial information that could bring down the entire operation. We take Sosa alive. He knows where they move the kids. At 2,200 hours, they moved. Jeremy disabled exterior security cameras while Cody positioned himself for overwatch. Clark and Dave approached the building's rear entrance, using shadows and industrial equipment for concealment. The first guard never knew what hit him. Dave's chokehold rendered him unconscious in seconds. They dragged his body behind a dumpster and continued toward the building. Inside, the warehouse was divided into sections, legitimate construction materials in front, more questionable cargo in the rear. Clark could hear voices from an upstairs office. Sosa arguing with someone about acceptable losses and cleanup protocols. They climbed an external staircase, moving silently on metal steps. Through a grimy window, Clark could see Sosa at a desk, talking on an encrypted phone while Clayton Gray sat across from him. Both targets in one location. Perfect. Clark gestured to Dave, who nodded and circled toward the office's secondary entrance. When they were in position, Clark kicked in the main door. Sosa and Gray reached for weapons, but Clark was faster. He shot Gray in the shoulder, spinning him away from his gun, then covered Sosa with his rifle. And where I can see them, Jake. Sosa raised his hand slowly, his face a mask of professional calm. You must be the soldier who's been causing problems. Where are the children? What children? This is a construction company. Clark shot Sosa in the kneecap. The predator screamed and collapsed. Wrong answer. Let's try again. Dave secured Gray, who was whimpering and bleeding from his shoulder wound. This one's at a laptop bag. Financial records, contact lists, operational details. Good. Jake, my patience is limited. Where did you move the children? Sosa gritted his teeth against the pain. You're crazy if you think. Clark shot his other kneecap. I've got all night, Jake. How long do you think you can last? The warehouse in Springfield. But it's empty now. We moved everyone after your friend's radio chatter. Move them where? Go to hell. Clark applied pressure to one of Sosa's wounded knees. The man's scream echoed through the building. I learned interrogation techniques in Afghanistan, Jake, from men who'd been doing it for generations. They taught me that everyone breaks eventually. The only question is how much damage they sustain first. Dave looked up from Gray's laptop. Clark, you need to see this. The screen showed financial records, payments to law enforcement officials, judges, social workers, federal agents. The network's reach was staggering. Agent Humphrey, Clark said, reading over Dave's shoulder. $200,000, paid monthly for 18 months. The feds aren't just incompetent, Dave realized. They're complicit. Clark felt cold rage settle in his chest. While he'd been fighting for his country overseas, predators had been buying protection from the very agencies meant to stop them. His phone rang. Agent Humphrey. Ortega, we know where you are. You're surrounded. Come out with your hands up. Clark looked out the window. Federal vehicles were indeed surrounding the building, but something was wrong. The agents weren't taking tactical positions. They were forming a perimeter to contain, not assault. They're not here to arrest us, Clark realized. They're here to silence us. Dave understood immediately. Witnesses to federal corruption. Jake, Clark said, turning back to Sosa. Time for one final question. Your network has federal protection, doesn't it? Sosa smiled through his pain. You stupid soldier. You think this is about money? This goes all the way to Washington. Judges, senators, cabinet members, they're all clients. Names. Even if I told you, you'd never live to use the information. Clark's radio crackled. Agent Humphrey's voice. Fire in the hole. Everyone down. Clark shouted. The building shook as explosives detonated around the foundation. Federal agents weren't planning arrests. They were planning to eliminate evidence and witnesses. Backstairs, Dave yelled over the sound of collapsing concrete. They grabbed Sosa and Gray, dragging the wounded men toward the rear exit. Outside, the compound was chaos. Federal agents with automatic weapons, local police arriving in confusion, and civilians fleeing the area. Cody's voice crackled through their radio. Sniper nests on adjacent buildings. This is a kill box. Jeremy added, I count 20 federal agents, but they're not coordinating with local police. This is an illegal operation. Clark made a tactical decision. Jeremy broadcast everything. live streamed to social media, news outlets, anyone who'll listen. Let the world see federal agents trying to silence witnesses. Within minutes, Jeremy had activated multiple communication channels. Live video showed federal agents with military weapons surrounding a building containing rescued children and evidence of massive corruption. Local news crews arrived, then national media. Federal agents found themselves on camera, their illegal operation exposed to public scrutiny. Clark's phone rang. This time it was Detective Reed. "Clark, I've got 30 patrol units en route. Whatever the feds are doing, it's not legal. We're going to protect you and those evidence files." "Copy that, Alan. Tell your people to be careful. These agents are willing to kill to protect their network." As local police arrived in force, federal agents found themselves outnumbered and outmaneuvered. Agent Humphrey tried to assert federal jurisdiction, but Detective Reed had contacted state authorities and FBI headquarters in Washington. Within an hour, Agent Humphrey and 6 other agents were in custody, charged with corruption, conspiracy, and attempted murder. The evidence Dave had recovered from Gray's laptop was devastating. Financial records, client lists, and operational details that would destroy the network. But Jake Sosa made one final play. As he was being loaded into an ambulance, he activated a device hidden in his jacket. "Dead man switch," he gasped to Clark. "The children die in 60 minutes unless I send an abort code." Clark leaned close to Sosa's ear. "Then you better start talking." Chapter 9. Justice Served. The abandoned grain elevator outside Lake Morrison stood silhouetted against the dawn sky like a monument to forgotten industry. According to Sosa's confession, 42 children were imprisoned in its converted underground storage areas, the network's primary holding facility. Clark studied the structure through binoculars as state police, SWAT teams positioned themselves around the perimeter. Detective Reed had convinced the state attorney general to launch an emergency operation, bypassing federal interference. Thermal imaging shows multiple heat signatures in the basement levels, Jeremy reported. Looks like Sosa was telling the truth. Dave monitored communications. No radio chatter from inside. Either they don't know we're here, or they're maintaining radio silence. Clark checked his watch. 20 minutes until Sosa's dead man's switch activated whatever killing mechanism threatened the children. The hospital had sedated Sosa for surgery, making him unable to send abort codes even if he wanted to cooperate. "SWAT leader wants to know our approach recommendations," Reed said through Clark's ear. Clark assessed the tactical situation. The grain elevator had limited access points, but also limited escape routes for hostiles. The basement location would contain any explosions, but also made rescue more dangerous. "Tell them we need a simultaneous 3-point breach," Clark advised. "Main entrance, service tunnel, and emergency shaft. Fast insertion, immediate descent to hostage location." "Roger. You're going in with the first wave." Clark looked at Dave, Jeremy, and Cody, men who'd followed him through hell and were ready to do it again. "Last mission, gentlemen. Let's bring these children home." At 0647 hours, they moved. Clark descended through the service tunnel with Alpha Team, while Dave led Bravo Team through the main entrance. Jeremy coordinated communications, while Cody provided overwatch from an adjacent building. The tunnel opened into a concrete maze, converted grain storage areas connected by narrow corridors. The air was thick with fear and desperation. Clark heard them before he saw them. Children crying, calling for parents who couldn't hear them, begging for mercy from captors who had none. The first guard appeared around a corner, assault rifle ready. Clark's shot took him center mass before he could raise his weapon. 2 more guards responded to the gunfire, but military training trumped criminal experience. Alpha Team, hostiles down. Proceeding to hostage location. Dave's voice. Bravo Team encountering heavy resistance. Multiple armed subjects. Clark reached the main holding area and felt his heart stop. Dozens of children, aged 5 to 15, chained in concrete cells like animals. Many showed signs of prolonged abuse. All looked at him with the hollow eyes of broken innocence. U.S. military, Clark announced, removing his helmet. "You're safe now. We're taking you home." A boy who couldn't have been older than 10 spoke in a whisper. They said soldiers would never find us. Well, they were wrong, Clark replied, beginning to cut chains and locks. What's your name, son? Tommy. Tommy Chun. Have you seen my sister Lucy? They took her upstairs. Clark's blood froze. Upstairs meant the operational levels where the network's worst activities occurred. Alpha Team, I need immediate backup for upper-level clearing. But before anyone could respond, Clayton Gray appeared in the doorway, holding a detonator and wearing a suicide vest. Nobody moves, Gray commanded, his voice shaking with desperation. I pressed this button, we all die together. Clark assessed the situation instantly. Gray was 20 feet away, finger on the trigger. The explosive vest would collapse this section of the building, killing dozens of children. Let the kids go, Clayton. This is between us. No, you destroyed everything. Years of work, billions in revenue, connections that took decades to build. You mean connections to abused children that needed to be destroyed. Gray's face contorted with rage and madness. These children are property, merchandise. You don't understand the economics. Clark moved while Gray was talking, using a support pillar for cover. At the same moment, a small voice called out from behind Gray. Mister, please don't hurt my brother. A little girl, maybe 6 years old, had crawled out of one of the cells. Lucy Chun, Tommy's sister. Gray spun toward her, momentarily distracted. Clark's shot took him in the head before he could react. The detonator clattered across the concrete floor, but didn't activate. Dead man's switches required continuous pressure. Gray's death had disarmed the device. Clear, Clark shouted. All children secure. Over the next hour, they evacuated 42 children from the grain elevator. Medical teams, social workers, and trauma specialists provided immediate care, while law enforcement processed evidence that would dismantle the entire network. Detective Reed found Clark sitting outside the building, watching children reunite with families who'd thought them lost forever. Lyle Gross was arrested in Chicago 2 hours ago, Reed reported. Financial evidence led to raids in 8 states. The entire network is collapsing. Clark nodded, feeling empty despite the victory. How many total? 87 children recovered alive. Estimated 200 more over the past 5 years. Reed couldn't finish. 200 children who died because evil men found profit in innocence, and because corrupt officials had protected the killers instead of the victims. What about the federal agents? Humphrey and 6 others are facing federal charges. Turns out the real FBI has been investigating the corruption for months. Your actions just broke the case wide open. Clark's phone buzzed. Diana, calling from the safe house. Clark? I saw the news. Are you okay? I'm fine. It's over, Diana. You and Sophia can come home. What about us? Our marriage. Clark watched as 8-year-old Sarah Manning ran into her mother's arms, both of them crying with joy and relief. I don't know, Clark admitted. You enabled a predator to abuse our daughter. That's not something I can forget. I was scared. So was Sophia. Every day, while you did nothing. Silence on the line. Then, will you at least try? For Sophia's sake? Clark closed his eyes, thinking of his daughter's smile when he'd removed that collar, her trust that Daddy would keep his promises. We'll see. Bring Sophia home, Diana. She's been through enough. As the sun rose over Lake Morrison, Clark felt something he hadn't experienced since returning from deployment. Peace. Not happiness. The war had cost too much for that. But the satisfaction of a mission completed, of promises kept, of evil defeated. Jake Sosa died in surgery, never learning whether his abort codes might have saved anyone. Clayton Gray's network was destroyed, its leaders dead or imprisoned, its victims finally free. Most importantly, somewhere in the distance, Clark could hear children laughing as they played with the therapy dogs social workers had brought. Real laughter, not the broken sounds he'd heard in that basement. Sophia would laugh like that again someday. All of them would. Clark had kept his promise. No one would hurt them again. The war was over. The children were safe. Justice had been served. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your precious time. If you enjoyed this story, then please make sure you subscribe to this channel. That would help me a lot. Click on the video you see on the screen
and I will see you there.